Hello and welcome back to our Learning More About the Bible series, where we aim to help you move forward in your understanding of the Bible, starting with the very simplest questions in our early videos and moving on to the most in-depth and detailed questions about how to analyse and teach the Bible to others. This video is for the second section in that series and aims to help you understand more about the structure and makeup of the Bible, so that you can be confident and comfortable finding your way around it. It's actually the second video in that section. You'll see there's a longer one on the channel, but this is the simple and condensed version if you don't have time to plough through a 40-minute analysis. So bear with me and I will bring up a PowerPoint, which will hopefully help us understand the structure of the Bible and a bit more of what we want to talk about today. There we are. Please excuse that battle with technology. So, learning more about the Bible, finding your way around the Bible. When you're walking in the countryside, it's much easier to know where you are and where you're going if you have a map, if you have some depiction of what the landscape is. And the aim of today is really to give you a map of the Bible, to help you understand the different books that go into making it up and how they differ from one another, so that you can go to whichever bit of the Bible you want to read at the time. So here is our attempt at a Bible map, and each of these little rectangles represents one of the books of the Bible. You remember I said there are 66 books that make up the whole Bible. And they come in two blocks, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament was written between probably about 1400 and 400 BC. It was written in Hebrew, and it was very much centered in the territory of Israel, Palestine. And it breaks down into 5 blocks, 3 blocks of 5 and 2 blocks of 12. So let me take us through those. The first block of the Old Testament is 5 books of law. It's the first 5 books of the Bible. They're also sometimes called the Torah, which is a Hebrew word for instruction, or pretentious people call them the Pentateuch, which is basically another way of saying 5 books. And these first 5 books go from the creation of the world through to the point where God's people were preparing to have a land and a nation of their own. And most of the books deal with instructions for how they are to live in that land as that nation. Then you've got 12 books of histories, these ones here in red, and the histories deal with the story of God's people living in that land. Things they got right, the things they got wrong, the things they got very wrong, all the ups and downs of that story. Then you've got 5 volumes here of wisdom, or sometimes called the writings, because they're a little bit more general than just wisdom. And these are songs and poems really held together by the common theme of being about everyday living with God. Some, like the book of Proverbs, is famous for common sense, everyday wisdom. The book of Job deals with when things go wrong, when bad things happen to good people. The Song of Songs deals with romantic love, and the Psalms is the hymn book of Israel. Then you've got 5 volumes of the major prophets. That just means the bigger prophets. They were bigger books, and usually those bigger books went into a bit more depth than the minor prophets, the smaller prophets. So you've got 5 major prophets, starting with Isaiah, who wrote the longest book. And these were men who were sent by God to give a message to his people. That's really what a prophet is in the Bible. And sometimes that involved foretelling the future. Often it involved talking about the present and what people were doing wrong and needed to change. But the major prophets especially didn't just talk about the present, but also about the whole sweep of God's plan for the world and about its destiny, about the future and what things were one day going to be like. And they promised that he would send a saviour to help those who struggled to keep the law, who struggled to live rightly. Then you've got 12 books of minor prophets, which are shorter, smaller books, often addressed more to specific circumstances, but also containing messages from God to Israel. The last of those prophets wrote around 400 BC, Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament. And then there was 400 years of silence before an angel came bringing a message to a young girl pledged to be married in Nazareth, and the New Testament began, the arrival of that promised rescuer. At the heart of the New Testament are these 4 books of Gospels. Gospel is just from an Old English word for good news, gospel, which itself is just a translation of the word that the Gospels use to describe themselves, evangelion, good news. The Gospels and the rest of the New Testament are in Greek because that had become the general language of the time by this point. So the 4 Gospels are 4 eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life and especially of his death. Most of them devote about a third of their length to talking about his death and resurrection, because that's the absolutely central linchpin of the Christian faith, that he came, he died for us, and he rose from the dead. And the 4 Gospels are followed by a book of history, the book of Acts, which tells the story of the early church from Jesus' death to the point where it had reached Rome and had, in a sense, gone global. Rome was the centre of the known world at the time. The book of Acts is followed by the letters, and they're sometimes called the epistles, which is just the Latin word for letter. And this is by far the largest category in the New Testament. The letters were written by leaders of the early church, companions of Jesus, to the new churches that were springing up across the world, helping them understand how to live as Christians in their circumstance, in their situation. So some are quite deep and systematic and theological, like Romans. Some are very simple and short and practical, like Philemon. But they're really all about putting the Christian faith into practice for those early communities. And then finally, there's the book of Revelation. And this in many ways looks quite like a prophetic book. It's very similar. It's a message to the church of the time. But more than most of the prophets, what this book is trying to do is draw back the veil of the things that are seen and show what's going on in the unseen realm, in the spiritual world. What are the spiritual realities behind the experience of early Christians, and especially their experience of persecution? And Revelation ends by painting a picture of the future of the world, the future of Christians. It's a picture of a world where heaven and earth have been made new, where humanity has been made good and holy, and where God himself lives with them and is their God. And there is no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. And the Bible ends on that great picture to look forward to. It ends on a hope of a world made new. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that gives you a picture of the structure of the Bible to find your way around. I would encourage you, having a map of the countryside is no good if you don't go out and go for a walk. You'll never know the countryside from the map as well as you will if you go and explore it. So here is your map of the Bible. Let me encourage you to go and have a read of it. Maybe if you're new to the Bible, start with one of the Gospels. I recommend Mark's Gospel. It's the second of the 4. It's short and simple and to the point, but it'll give you the basic story of Jesus. But have an explore. Find your way around the map and see how you get on. And if you'd like to know more about those different types of book in the Bible and how to read them and get the most out of them, watch the longer video in section 2. If you'd like to think a little bit more about putting the Bible into practice and how to apply it to oneself, come back for the next video in the series. God bless.